Hello and welcome to My Dad the Bobby, episode 1. Join me, Emma Brown, as I interview my dad, Paul Brown, about his time working as a police officer, detective and private investigator. With over 30 years in the industry and heaps of stories and experience, Dad will be talking about what it was like in the police force, solving crimes and catching criminals. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoy the show. Hello everyone. Hi Dad, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, Emma. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. Thank you for joining us. So Dad, you didn't really know what a podcast was before I invited you to do this, did you?
I'm too old for this sort of thing. I don't know what a podcast is, and I've definitely never had any part in making one, so it's all been an experience, won't it?
So firstly, I would like to say thank you to my dad for signing himself up for something, even though he didn't really know what he was getting himself into. So thanks, Dad.
You're welcome.
To show my appreciation, I've written you a little intro to tell the audience about you and make you seem cool and interesting.
Well, that'll need some work, that bit, so I was quite surprised you invited me, but thanks anyway.
Okay, here we go. With over 30 years' experience in the industry, ex-police officer, detective and private investigator Paul Brown is here to share what life is really like in the police force. From responding to 999 calls to interviewing criminals and solving cases, Paul's career has given him a unique perspective on the world that he is here to share with us throughout this podcast. So thank you, Dad. Thanks for being here with us and sharing your stories.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I'll do my very best to make it entertaining.
So to introduce myself for a second, my name is Emma. I've been studying and working in the audio industry for close to 6 years now. I'm currently in my final year of uni studying audio and music technology, but I've also worked in radio, podcasting and conference. I've interviewed some incredible people and now I get to interview my most interesting guest yet, my own dad. And most importantly, I'm your daughter, obviously.
Yeah,
That's
right.
quite
I'm
an
your
important
dad.
aspect to the show.
That's the way it works.
Now, people might be thinking this is going to be a really easy job for me because I will have already heard all your stories. But actually, growing up, I don't think I heard that many. Because I was a kid, like, you wouldn't tell a 7-year-old, like, you're going out and catching criminals and, like, all the stuff you do at work, you know?
Yeah, there was a lot of things you never knew about.
Yeah. So I think, like, I don't know a lot of stuff, so I'm quite excited as well to find out some more about you and more about your career.
Because we've never had a conversation, have we, prior to this about what my life consisted of?
No, I mean, when I moved to Cambridge, you know, you used to work at it, like, in Cambridge and around, and, like, you would tell me stories sometimes of things that had happened while you've been in this city. But apart from that, we haven't really spoken about anything else.
No.
So actually, like, before I start asking you questions, I have to do a little disclaimer before we start the show. As we're discussing quite a serious topic, I will just say that everything my dad says in this show is going to be his own experiences and opinions. Any views expressed are his own and not the views of the police force. Dad hasn't been in the police for over 10 years now, so the way he explained how things are done in the police force, they may have changed, they may not be the same, and all the info may not be up to date. But these are just the views, memories, and experiences that my dad has.
That's right.
Okay, so Dad, firstly, do you want to introduce yourself and give us a little rundown of all the things you've done in your career?
Okay, well, I spent 30 years plus being a police officer of types. I actually joined as a police cadet in 1979, where I did a year before you actually become a police officer, a police constable in 1980. And the first 3 or 4 years, you do 2 years in probation, in uniform, and then you go into a uniform role. But actually, I only ever did 4 years in uniform. Mm-hmm. The rest of it, I was in different aspects of CID, so general CID office, dealing with burglary, thefts, robbery, etc. Then I moved on to the drug squad, did 2 or 3 years in there. Then I moved on to what we used to have in them days was regional crime squads. And I went to join the regional crime squad based at Milton Keynes, which was just basically a drugs wing dedicated to drug importation and serious crime. And then, won't give you dates exactly, but I ended up working for the National Criminal Intelligence Service in London, where my role was quite unique in the respect that I was what they call an informant handler. So I would speak to people who wanted to give information. That would be for several reasons. They would either want financial reward, they would want the kudos of it, they would want to eliminate opposition. So you had to be very aware of that, what their motive was. But then I moved on to the major investigation team back in Cambridgeshire, back in Force, which was dealing with, primarily it was dealing with murders, domestic murders or some quite high profile murders. I worked on the Soham inquiry. You're too young to remember that really, but the murder of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman in Soham. And my last 8 or 9 years was primarily dedicated to the investigation of murders within Cambridgeshire. But it was a great career, and I enjoyed it. I loved every day of it. It was good.
So for idiots like me, just going back quickly, what is CID?
The Criminal Investigation Department.
Okay, fine. Just clearing that up.
Because that was my thing. I enjoyed. I didn't enjoy the traffic side.
No.
I couldn't get excited about bald tyres and people running around with no tax disc or no insurance. It wasn't really my thing.
Yeah.
Breathalyzing people, it wasn't really my bag. But I enjoyed dealing with criminals, with intent, people who were bad in our society and needed taking out, and that was the part I enjoyed best.
Yeah. Well, I'm so surprised and glad to hear all that, because I didn't know you had done half of those things.
Yeah.
But that sounds very exciting. So we'll talk about all of that over these next 4 episodes.
Sure.
But going right back to the beginning, how did you get into the police force? Why did you want to be an officer? And what was being a police cadet like?
Well, from a very young age, first of all, I apologise for my voice. I've just come out of having a cold, so my voice isn't normally like this. It will improve over the podcast. I always wanted to be a police officer. My mother tells me ever since I was about the age of 5 or 6, I always wanted to be a police officer, and I never really changed that. And looking back on it, I wouldn't have changed it now. Sitting here today, it was a fantastic career. There were days that were not good, but that's in every job. But I enjoy being in the police. But when I left school, I actually was a police cadet for a year. And being a police cadet is where they're just preparing you before you actually enter the force as a regular. And you couldn't be recruited in to be a police officer until you're 18 and a half years of age. Well, at the time I left school, I was only 17 and a half. So I did a year as a police cadet, and primarily what that consisted of was, in the morning you would do things such as learn basic law. You would also do a day where you had to work in the community. So I remember working at Hunters Down Old People's Home. I worked at the Old Huntingdon Hospital, doing things like that. And there was a place, people with learning difficulties, you had to go and help out there. But in the afternoon, it was primarily dedicated to sport. Football, tennis, cross-country. I was never a very good cross-country runner, but I was quite a good football and I was quite a good tennis player. Yeah. And actually my PTI, my physical training instructor, was a guy called Jeff Capes. And Jeff Capes was actually an Olympian. He was a shot putter. And in fact, I think I'm right in saying at one point he was world's strongest man.
Oh, my God.
He was a police officer, although he did very little policing. Because he spent all his time going around the world competing for Great Britain in shot putting. So he was my PTI. And every afternoon he would have us sweating and making us physically sick in the gym and doing cross-country and things like that.
I was going to ask you, actually, when you go into the police, what is the basic level of fitness they expect, or how fit do you have to be? Because obviously in everyone's heads they think you run round chasing criminals all day and it's very intensive, but what's it actually like?
Have you seen some police officers? Some are grossly overweight and some are unfit and couldn't. They do have an annual fitness test, or certainly did when I was there. I don't know whether things have changed. I actually retired from Cambridgeshire Cambridgeshire Police in 2010. Although, as you know, I did go on to work abroad, working for on what was called the Serious Investigation and Prosecution Team on an inquiry out in Turks and Caicos in the Caribbean. That was more of a money laundering role, but the fitness levels for police officers at my age, when I was a cadet, were not difficult to achieve because I was a cadet. I was in training every day.
Yeah.
And Jeff Capes made sure you were fit. And the fitness. But as you went on, they used to do this thing, I don't know whether they still do it, they used to do the bleep test, where you run between a certain set time and the time decreases. And you had to qualify annually and like jump in and stretching and all these sort of things. But obviously the bar as to what you needed to be at a certain age, your age was taken into account. You know, it was set on where you were age-wise as to what level of fitness you needed to achieve. And in fairness, you didn't need to be exceptionally fit. You just needed to prove that you weren't grossly unfit, if you know what I mean. There is a difference. So, it was fairly simple and straightforward for me because I always had a reasonable standard of fitness.
So when you became a police detective, you were a police officer in uniform for only 3 or 4 years, but actually you spent most of your time as a detective or in those sort of roles.
Yeah.
Why did you want to go into that role instead of regular policing?
Well, like I said to you earlier, I didn't really get excited about traffic issues.
Yeah.
And you can spend a lot of time, particularly these days. I feel sorry for the guys and girls on the force these days. They spend a lot of time Friday, Saturday nights being abused and spat on and sworn at, and there's a lot of knives on the street these days, and there's drugs, and it's not a good place to be. When I was in the force, back in, let's say, when I first joined CID, it would have been around 1984, 85, the police were a bit more respected, and you didn't get the violence that you have now. I mean, you did have the odd, the odd skirmish, but it wasn't like the things the guys and girls have to deal with these days. It was a different job. But I was really interested in crime, detection of crime. And I think I really got interested on it when I was, when I first joined CID. I was one of 2 officers on a late shift, and we had information come in about a burglary had happened at a school. And we had some information come in about where the property was. And it all fell into place like clockwork. We obtained a warrant. We went round the house. We found the property. We arrested the people concerned. It doesn't always fall into place like that, as you can imagine. But on this occasion, it did. And I think that really ignited me, is that I wanted to be into crime investigation. But if I can term it, the sexy part of policing was like drug squad work.
Yeah.
And surveillance and things like that. And when I moved to the drug squad and was involved in operations there, it's sort of all the time I was looking at the aspect of crime detection. And I think when you join the police, you quite quickly form a view as to whether you want to be in traffic, or whether you want to be in the crime side of things, or just general police duties. But general police duties, you also get a lot of stuff that most police officers don't like dealing with. For example, domestic disputes.
Yeah.
Husband and wife arguing. He spent too much time in the pub. She's cooked Sunday lunch.
Yeah.
He's not there.
Yeah.
Or Sunday afternoons you used to dread because there'd be domestic argument. And police officers don't like getting involved in that stuff.
Yeah.
Because you can't win, you come out as the villain.
Yeah.
So, crime was my thing, and what I enjoyed investigating and what I enjoyed looking into.
Yeah. So, funnily enough, one of the things you've mentioned quite a few times is, I remember a very long time ago, you said to me that you've had nearly every job apart from a traffic officer.
Yeah.
So tell me, more about that role, or when you decided you didn't want to do that, or why you decided, and that kind of stuff.
Well, like I say, I mean, I was never interested in traffic stuff.
Yeah.
When you're in your probation, you first join, you have to prove yourself, so you have to go across a spectrum of general policing and what you can do. And you used to have to go out and get a certain amount of what they call process, which was like cars with no tags, bald tyres, no insurance, no MOT, defective light, and it's just not my thing. It's just, who cares, really? But for me, that's why I decided crime was, I like dealing with criminals. And although frustrating, though, is particularly when you're dealing with solicitors, which can be unhelpful, and they're doing their job in trying to get their person out of being charged, and you're trying to find the evidence to charge someone.
Yeah.
So it can be frustrating, but it was rewarding. It was a great job. I loved every day of it, and Cambridgeshire Police were very good to me. I worked for 30 years for Cambridgeshire, and it also gave me the opportunity to get the experience whereby I could, when I retired in 2010, I got offered a job out in the Caribbean investigating government corruption out in Turks and Caicos, which really, although I went willingly and I'm glad I had the experience, it was really a money laundering thing, which wasn't really my bag.
Yeah.
Because you had to be a financial investigator. But
Yeah.
I worked in quite a lot of roles that involved intelligence, and I was on the intelligence side of that operation.
You were on the intelligence side.
Funny.
No, so I think we're going to talk a bit more about the drug squad and all of that kind of investigative work in some of the later episodes, like episodes 3 and 4.
Yeah.
And I know you mentioned the drug squad being perhaps the most glamorous, but was that your favourite job you had, and why was that the favourite job? Or what was your favourite job?
I think for the prestige, it was probably working for the National Criminal Intelligence Service.
Right.
In Vauxhall in London.
Yeah.
Because we covered the whole of the southeast of England, and the National Criminal Intelligence Service was set up at the time to investigate the 100 most core criminals in the country. But it had various aspects of it, some of which I can't discuss.
Yeah.
But the actual job that gave me the most satisfaction was working on the major investigation team, and that was dealing with primarily just with murders. And you wouldn't think Cambridgeshire has that many murders.
Yeah.
And there's some murders you probably don't even become aware of.
Yeah.
But we worked on murders all the time. And my last 8 years of my service was working purely on murder inquiries. And some of those were very, very high profile, i.e. the Soham murders. There were 17 different police forces drafted in. It was the most...
Wow.
It was a worldwide inquiry because it got worldwide attention. And it was tragic for the family, it was tragic for the Soham, and it was tragic for Cambridgeshire. But Cambridgeshire were a small force, and it drafted in officers from various other forces. And officers from Kent were actually the officers that were dedicated to interviewing the suspects of that inquiry. And it was then decided at a later date, as a result of an outside inquiry, that all officers should be, or some officers should be specifically trained in the interviewing of murder suspects.
Right.
And I was one of those fortunate enough to be selected to interview murder suspects. And so after that event, it sort of changed my career, because many of the murders that happened in Cambridgeshire, I was drafted in to interview the murder suspects, and that involves a lot of preparation, and you attend a 3 or 4 week course, I can't remember how many weeks it was, about the way to interview and the many aspects of how an interview is prepared and how you conduct an interview. And a lot of that is quite pressurised stuff, because there's a lot of pressure on you to get it right, because, families are waiting for an outcome.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And you try to do your best for them. But that was the part of the job that gave me the most satisfaction. If you're looking for the glamour side of it, it would be doing the surveillance on the drug squad and the on the regional crime squad.
Yeah.
The National Criminal Intelligence Service that I worked for 6 years, that was purely an intelligence role. And although it's an enjoyable job, you don't ever get to see the end result.
Right.
Because you're trying to distance yourself from the intelligence and the end result, because you don't want to be in the court procedure, the witness process.
Right.
So you would need the sterile corridor. You would gain the intelligence. You would hand it to the team within the country that would deal with it. 9 times out of 10, that would be the Met Police.
Yeah.
And then once you'd handed the evidence, she would give it over, and that's the end of it. That's your job done. It was down to the person you give it to, or the team you gave it to develop it and bring it to fruition. But the actual job satisfaction side was definitely the major investigation team, and I had some great bosses there who put a lot of faith in me and allowed me to do what I really enjoyed the most, which was interview suspects and vulnerable and intimidated witnesses.
Mm-hmm. So looking back now, after all those things you've done, what do you miss most about the police?
I miss the people, really. Mm-hmm. You meet some great people. You meet people that are very dedicated. The police get a lot of bad press. You know, they see the bad side of them, but they don't see all the hundreds and hundreds of great things they do. But I had a great time, and it was a rewarding job. And I do miss it. I miss the people anyway.
Yeah. So I want to wrap this up because I feel like we're getting onto a lot of topics that are going to be developed in much more detail in further episodes.
Okay.
So my final question to you for this episode is going to be, what advice would you give a young person who wants to go into the police nowadays?
Wow. Think it through carefully. But I can only speak from my experience. I enjoyed every second of it. That's not to say there were days that were problematic and you didn't have issues, and there's days when you didn't want to go to work, but you get that no matter what job you're in.
Yeah.
But I would say it's a very rewarding job. It's personally satisfying. But these days it appears to me a very dangerous job.
Yeah.
And there's sometimes, it's like these guys who are on the firearms teams, and if they discharge a bullet and kill someone, they have a half a second to make their mind up whether they're going to shoot or not shoot.
Yeah.
But if it goes wrong, there's not too many people standing beside you saying, don't worry about it, it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Because you will get prosecuted for manslaughter or murder.
Yeah.
So give it some thought. But general policing, wonderful. You meet some fantastic people. 99.9% of the people join the job to do a good job and for no other reasons. Yeah, it's great. Great career.
And would you say, what personality traits, or I guess I'm asking, to be a police officer, do you think you have to be particularly mentally tough before going into that role, before even going through training? Or is that something you learn?
No, you do. You do need to have a certain attitude.
Yeah.
You need to be able to, when you're at work and you find something that is, because you will see distressing things, and you will be in frightening situations. And there's no point saying you're not going to be scared, because you will be scared.
Yeah.
I can think of dozens of examples when I was scared.
Yeah.
But you've got to have the right mental attitude, and you have to be able to switch off. When you go home, you switch off, because that person you've been interviewing for 12 hours and you're going to go back in the interview room tomorrow.
Yeah.
He's a person in his cell who must have an 8-hour rest period. He must have his meals on time. He must have right to certain things, like he must have time to pray if he's of a certain faith, and he must have consultation with a solicitor. As an interviewing officer, when you come out that interview room, you've got to go home, have a shower, go to bed, try and mentally switch off, have a meal, get up in the following morning, switch back on again. And when you've been interviewing someone that's just murdered someone, you sometimes don't go to bed and just fall straight asleep.
Yeah.
So you got the right mental attitude, but you must have a massive sense of humour.
Yeah.
You've got to have a sense of humour, because if you haven't got a sense of humour, please don't apply. You've got to switch off.
You'll be awful to work with, and they don't want you there. No, I'm joking.
You're going to get upset at a lot of things you see, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff out there that's not great, not good. But the rewards are amazing. When you do a great job, it's good.
Yeah.
Really good, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Dad, very much. I think we'll leave it there for episode 1.
Okay.
And listeners, please join us for our next episode, which is going to be all about responding to 999 calls and the pressures of police investigations. Dad, have you got any final words for this episode?
I shall wait and see what the next one brings.
All right. Well, thank you very much for listening, everyone. You can contact us at mydadthebobby@gmail.com. That's all in one word. Or on our Instagram account, which is at mydadthebobby. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.